Is Teresa Lubano. Today I'm going to give you a lecture on advanced printing techniques, and this is an introduction to the topic. Um, just to let my audiences know, this is an advanced class, and therefore consideration should be made when looking at the notes. And it was a class that was administered to the third year students who are studying design at the University of Nairobi. So we'll now begin with a little introduction on the lecture. And the lecture is about how to design for digital printing. And we'll tackle several topics. We'll do a quick introduction on what we shall be covering today. We shall then look at the rule of thumb when it comes to designing for digital print. We'll consider resolutions that are important and are used when saving files. And then we shall discuss a little bit about Preflight, what to watch out for when you're preparing artworks for outputs. And then we shall then do an introduction to color management. And then I shall share some readings and videos for your reference and an assignment. So for the introduction, for this course, we're going to learn advanced printing techniques for the execution of the following applications. These are primarily items that are produced during commercial, advertising. It could be for packaging. It could be for promotional items and outdoor. So some of the items include apparel and printed textiles, as I mentioned, out of home signage, or large format prints such as billboards. We shall also this class will be helpful when applying your artworks during signage as well as packaging. As I had also mentioned, for promotional items, this is a very important course to design these and execute them, as well as for interior decor, exhibition and display, large formats that are usually used in these events, as well as, sorry, that's a typo. So the course will focus on the contemporary techniques of direct digital printing and color management. We may also speak about offset printing, but we'll just spotlight on this. What we won't discuss for this course is, things to do with filters or apps that are able to help you execute or pre-flight your work for printing. This is something you can always do a little research on, and they keep evolving, they keep changing. So what I will teach you are mainly fundamental content. Now, the rule of thumb is really tied to what it takes to do printing properly. So consider the most difficult of tasks is the preparation of print projects using digital print suitable for fabrics and textiles. It could be daunting, but the idea is for you to always ensure that you've checked your print file, or you've checked the specifications that the client has actually proposed to you, or if you're coming up with the specifications to prepare for the printers, you need to be very clear about what you want to achieve at the very end. So generally, a checklist is used, and it's the same mainly for whichever process of printing you may be using. So whether you're going with digital printing, or whether you're using offset printing as a method for production, screen or flexo or gravure, any printing method would generally need a checklist. And this is important because we need to advise, this will ensure that the printers are very clear on what you'd like to achieve. So I think in a nutshell, when it comes to what you need to keep top of mind, and as a rule, is that No one should really tell you that special technical requirements shouldn't be prepared. I think you should be able to prepare them as the designer of the job. And you should also ensure that you're very precise and specific so that nothing gets missed, because normally there's a cost implication, and sometimes if the job is very big it could be a huge cost implication, and you don't want to get it wrong even on the first go. So mine is just to mention that do not underestimate the challenges that could come from errors. So make sure that not only do you check the artworks that you'll be providing to your printers, also ensure that you have been very specific on what you'd like the final output to become. So for resolution considerations, it's important to consider the resolution of the images you're working with. Ensure you're working with very high quality images, particularly when you're looking at going for print. You can get away with this when you're looking at just digital outputs, that is, they will not be outputted as physical hard copies on paper or boxes or packaging or whatnot. So, what you need to ensure is that when you're doing your artwork, make sure you're using a suitable type of file format. um, and if you're also going to be using Illustrator, perhaps consider vectorized files, because these are really sharp and clear. And if it's for pixel-based images, make sure they're very good quality, um, particularly when you're reviewing the artwork to go to print, right? Other technical factors you may want to consider that are perhaps not necessarily tied to the resolution but are part of the print file checks that you need to look at and optimize are: consider bleeds and overprints that exist on your artworks. Think or look for trappings. Look for ghosting, which is usually occurs when someone is using rich black, which is a black that has a mixture of CMYK. You want to go perhaps with a black that is a true black, that is just key being 100, and perhaps doing an overprint of it so that it looks appropriate when being printed. Look at also things like if it's a pattern, ensure that your pattern seamlessly repeats end to end when it's tiled, whether it's backwards, forwards, sideways. Ensure that your repeat pattern completely is a full repeat and is seamlessly so. And then also for types of fonts used, ensure you have created outlines or text curves on them so that when you're sending the file to the printer, they do not have problems or issues with the same. Now we'll move on to color management. Now, color management is extremely extensive. It is it's something that I guess not only do you learn it theoretically, but you also learn more about it when you're practically doing your projects. So, in regards to color management, for today, we shall just talk a little bit about it. And what every designer needs to keep in mind is that not every color can be printed or reproduced in every printer on every substrate. What that simply means is that even if you've gotten your colors right from a screen perspective when you're designing your outputs, depending on the devices that will be used for outputting, um, each device has its own registration process of how those colors will appear on the outputs. And there are between 8 to 10,000 reasons why this is the case. And it's just simply because, we have printers who are using a combination of very many different formats, techniques of printing, including things like paper, including time of day, including, there's so many reasons why this is so, and we won't really quite get into it. But just to know that not every color can be reproduced in the very same way, and this is because every device or every printing device has its own um, um, hardware and software that supports its use. So don't really believe anyone who tells you otherwise, because it's not true. And if you're concerned about color accuracy in your print project, there are some basics to keep in mind at the onset. And what you need to achieve is essentially just that, 95%. And if you do understand color management, color theory principles, you're hopefully going to get there and get something good quality at the end of it all. So, to keep in mind are four things that I'd like to share with you when it comes to color management. And these are four things, right? So, there's color consistency, calibration, characterization, and conversion. And if you look at the image on your left, you will see that, as you may know, what is perceived by the eye is so much more richer than, for example, what you know a printer would see, right? So always be certain that your eye may see a lot more richer colors. For example, what you see on screen is usually registered as RGB, whereas which is so much more richer in terms of spectrum. Whereas when you look at now what is finally outputted by your printer, we have a constraint on this, and this is simply just because not when it comes to printing, not every single color in the universe can be registered, so there's always some sort of optimization. Now when it comes to the 4 C's of color management, I'd like to go through them one by one quickly. Now, color consistency simply means when you're producing products like brochures, boxes, billboards, basically anything, all printing relies on the CMYK color space, right? And this is also called 4 color processing printing. We're looking at printers applying C, which stands for cyan, M for magenta, Y for yellow, and the K stands for key, which represents the blank inks that will help you achieve photorealistic results. So always keep top of mind consistency in all your artworks. The next one is about color calibration for devices. Now, every single printer ensures that not only are the screens that the designers are using calibrated, but also the printing devices that are used. So one needs to ensure that the input devices like the monitors and the output devices like the printers can produce consistent colors without any variation, and therefore they need to be calibrated. Um, this equipment also needs to be checked so that it's set up to the baseline or the standard mode. Device color drifts over time. So one needs to create a routine for validating the calibration of all devices so as to achieve continued consistency when it comes to outputs, right? So color characterization is usually the color measurement instruments that are used. For example, a colorimeter or a spectrophotometer, and they help you determine your device's color reproduction characteristics. So characterization will optimize the settings of the best images reproduced on your device. Finally, color conversion is the process of moving color data from the color spaces of one device to the color spaces of another device. So for example, when you're moving from a camera profile into a monitor profile and then moving from a monitor profile into a printer profile, basically that color of those objects moves across to the next device. Now, we shall discuss a little bit more about ICC profiles because this is what controls the color spaces of these artworks or images, and they get converted across all devices. So we'd really like you to master these 4 things because they are really interrelated and codependent of each other when it comes to color management. Now, um, there's a concept called Preflight. It's very well much used in the printing world, and it's really a term that originated back in the day, and there's communication around this about how it originated, and essentially it was used during aviation, and the term refers to checks that a pilot and ground crew had to do before clearing off, or taking off, right? Now, we this term was used by a creative consultant. He's called Chuck Weger, and he used it within the creative arts industry around the 1990s, where he mentioned that, something similar like this happens when it comes to preparing artworks for output. And it's really about, you know, the need for handling electronic artworks and before sending it off to be printed. So a pre-flight checklist is normally created for the print production process and can use simple words that are written for the printer to note. Now it could be simple terms like, don't forget to check this, that, and the other, or it could be a checklist proper of what exactly needs to occur during the printing process. For example, informing things like paper weight grammage, printing technique, number of colors, and so on and so forth. And it really is also, it insinuates what to watch out for in your artwork preparation. This is extremely important because no printer will knows what exactly the designer envisions, and also what the client requires. So there's sort of a very good relationship between designers, the pre-press printer or the front end printer, and the production team that are producing the outputs for these artworks. And therefore, the concept called pre-flight or preparing artworks for print is a very common occurrence that happens. And what you need to just remember, it's a simple written checklist that is used to ensure that whatever needs to happen to the artwork when it comes to matters production is adhered to. Now, a pre-flight checklist um, is also very important because one may not sometimes perceive what will happen, and therefore it can also just inform a simple color proof before the checklist again can be updated and corrected once client has approved this proof, and then you can proceed with with a production process that is more or less um, good to go from a designer as well as a client point of view. So in front of you, I have an example of a specification sheet that I'd like you to look at. And this is purely as an example purpose for me to demonstrate to you how to prepare a pre-flight checklist. Now, the title of this artwork on my right is called A Sunflower Group Kit, Wrapper Surround for a Midi-sized Pot. Now, the client is called Shop Nanjala. You've seen the identity right there, just on the artwork. If you look at that black circular blob right in the middle of that artwork, to the slight left, and the item is called a grow kit. So what we're looking at is really a wrapper surround, and it's part of a packaging. It's basically a packaging wrapper that will wrap around a pot, a terracotta pot. Now, so what I will read now is sort of what the checklist would have. So definitely it would have the name of the type of file. So in this instance, it's Sunflower Grow Kit, Wrapper Surround for a midi-sized pot. You'd also want to name your file, something similar. Now, The artwork would also, the pre-flight list would also include an artwork size. In this instance, it says it's an artwork with two sides, side A and side B, and the total artwork size is 50 centimeters by 45 centimeters, right? It would also speak about the paper. Now, the paper preferred would be 250 GSM craft card paper. Notice that there are different types of craft paper, and in this instance, it's a card type. The print technique, because the consideration is small quantities, the designer or the client has recommended a digital print, meaning it will be quick, fast. There's instances where there needs to be creases done. So the designer has mentioned crease the circular top side. There are also die cuts to be made, and therefore the designer has also described where the die cuts occur. And if you look at the artwork closely, you'll see a key line in magenta that indicates where the cutting will be made, where the creasing will be made with a dotted line. And he indicates by saying there are windows to hold the pot at the lip section, and there are creases and folds at the slots for the closure. So this is very specific in terms of where the die cuts are and where the folds are. Then there's also an indication for a matte lamination on both sides to ensure that the artwork is more or less waterproofed, because this is an item that will be holding pot, seeds, soil, and so on, going by just the mock-up that we see there at the bottom in the middle. And then, of course, the number of colors. Now, the number of colors here indicates a full color. However, it could also be that this is a two-color job, because there's this rich yellow. It could be a Pantone or a CMYK, and there's also black. We're assuming this is a true black. But essentially, going by the specs, we see it indicated as a full color job. Then always remember to indicate the quantities. So the quantities will be 10 pieces of the sunflower wrapper surround, and finished with die cutting, folds, and a slot for closure. So this is a typical way of doing a complex or medium complex pre-flight specification checklist. As you can see, there's a lot being indicated here. It also perhaps needs a trial run where we would do a color proof, and the printers would share this with the client or the designer, and just to ensure that it fits around the pot. Now, another thing or another tip to make your work easy is to also share the actual pot with the printer, so that when they're doing the first, origination, they're able to then test and see whether it does indeed go wrap around the actual pot, close, before they actually share with the designer or the printer the final color proof for approval for mass production. So this is very, very important. And as I said, every single job that goes for print must have a pre-flight checklist. And this is something that should not be underestimated. So a couple more tips on what to watch out for during pre-flight. Images are at far too low resolution to be printed should be watched out for. Now, to mitigate against this, ensure that at least you stay well over 100 dpi, though I had recommended to you that 300 or more dpi is the best for effective resolution, specifically for printing, for textile printing or for large format printing, right? So make sure you have a high resolution artwork. By effective, we mean what the resolution is after you have inserted the image and enlarged it in the layout software. If you add an image at at least stay within the 300 dpi, but then enlarging the image by 200% would definitely half the effective resolution, and it then will be 100 dpi in the artwork. So again, remember, particularly when it comes to doing large format artworks, you want to ensure that even if you're doing a small ratio, like say an artwork that's 10 by 20 to represent a 1 meter by 2 meter artwork, ensure that when the designer goes to magnify the scale, the resolution is maintained either by it being a vector file, or that you have done a trial check that when the magnification is done of say a raster image, we don't get a pixelated effect because of the a low resolution, right? So you almost want to ensure that even if the printer goes to do a scaling, there's some sort of good qualityness that is still maintained, and registers when it's printed as good quality. So another thing is to check everything, get the print specifications right before sending anything to print. If you have a concern or you perhaps are not clear on what specifications you'd like to use, say for example, paper quality, your printers are experts at this and can always advise you on the correct paper or correct formats to send your artworks, right? Then finally, always add bleeds. This is between 3 to 5 mm. For small products, items like packaging, brochures, posters, booklets, you want to stay around the 3 mm as a general rule. For big product items like say, large format vinyl banners, or it's, a billboard artwork, you want to stay within the 5 mm range, right? Now, bleeds refer to prints that need to go entirely to the edge of the substrate. It's a term for when a printed area is meant to be cut off, but you want the image to go over the trimmed edge so that it doesn't leave this ugly white outline on the edge of your artwork. So therefore, always ensure you add bleeds to your artworks. Another thing is to make sure your artboard is correct and precisely what the printer is required to print. So for example, if you're going to print a DL envelope, make sure it's a DL envelope. If you're going to print something that's C5, say envelopes also can be printed in such sizes, ensure your artwork is set within that very specific artboard, and check that you don't confuse things like lengths and widths because they do differ. Again, also ensure that you are orienting your scale as a true ratio. So for example, if you're designing a billboard that say is 90 by 120 centimeters, you want to work with say a ratio of that, say 9 by 12 centimeters, ensure that you have gotten the orientation perfectly correct. So if the 9 is the width and the length is 12, then ensure that this is essentially what you've done as you prepare your artwork on your artboard. So that's the setting you should choose for your artboard. Now, trapping is also something you need to watch out for. Trapping is a term used when different colors touch in a design. So ensure that there's no trappings occurring, because this overlap could easily be seen when printing, and you don't want this to occur, right? For example, if you're having an area with pure yellow and another area of cyan, that is blue, side by side, there would be a green of the overlap due to some slight misregistration in the printing process. If this is something that's not deliberate, you want to avoid this. So make sure that when they're joining, they're just touching these two colors and not overlapping, because it is important that this check is done. Well, thankfully, digital printing presses are extremely precise in how they lay down ink. So if your artworks are more or less good to go, um, they will be, this will not be a concern. However, also print press masters are able to check for these things before they send your artwork to print, right? The other final one is always request for a color proof. I can't emphasize this enough, particularly when you're looking at bulk printing. Even if you're printing 10 copies, or even if it's 1,000 or 10,000 copies, ensure you get a color proof sheet, which is essentially one page of how the color looks of that particular document or artwork, and it must be approved by yourself, the designer, as well as the client as a thumbs up for the printer to carry on with the bulk printing. So normally you will find that sometimes when the artwork is too large, the print proof is just a registration of a part of the artwork, say for example a billboard, and it's usually printed on an A4 or A3 sheet. And this would just be for you to check things like color registration issues or check for sharpness and clarity of the artwork. Now, this is something that you must always remember is the final step to going for bulk production, and therefore treat it with the reverence it deserves. If you're not happy even with the slightest about an artwork, do not send it off to print and just say, let's just print. No. And also, if you've not gotten a formal approval from your client on this one specific thing, which is how the artwork looks from a color perspective or from even a text perspective, because sometimes it could be a booklet and you want to check and you want them to look at the text. So ensure even the whole booklet is printed and the client is signing all pages of the booklet, so that when it goes for print, there is no going back with someone being blamed for not having seen something here and there because of and just to let you know that there are cost implications and you don't want to really get it wrong at the very first time, right? So I think to conclude, I would like to just give I guess the bonus tip that when it comes to printing and digital printing at that, aim for excellence in print registration, do your pre-flight. Now, one thing that I'd like to mention before we close the lecture is that printing full photographs can be very daunting, right? And this is normally an extremely daunting task for people who do magazines or billboards, right? So this is because things like color management need to be really put into consideration, and there's specific details like color tone, skin tone and saturation errors and lighting and so on and so forth that need to be considered. So as a designer, aim for excellence. So ensure that you achieve high resolution formats. Do your color correction on Photoshop if you must. This is because how the registration happens at the very end is really predetermined by and large by the designer who's created the artwork, right? Another thing to look out for is lighting. The lighting treatment on a photograph essentially also determines how the artwork would look like when it's outputted. So I'll just like you to spend a little bit time to look at these two similar images, both of two women, but of course they're different in terms of race. So the lady on the left is of course African, and her the lighting is beautifully lit. You can see there is no blur effect. It's sort of a sharp resolution image. So achieving this shot may be more or less easier to do than from an output point of view than the one on the right. Now the right, it's a Caucasian lady, but notice that the image has some motion blur, and therefore there's some overlaps of colors. There's a very interesting sort of halo effect happening based on the lighting as well on her face. And this image is perhaps, or is most likely to be, a bit harder to register than the image on your left. So um, you know brightly lit images naturally would be easier to achieve from a print perspective than the one you've seen on the right, which is sort of, let me call it stylized. And one needs to be very certain that they're perhaps sending a JPEG of the final artwork to the printer so that they can draw comparisons of what an output would look like when they're sending you particularly the color proof. And you don't want them to get it wrong. You also have a higher vision of what you'd like to achieve on behalf of your client. So always ensure that you aim for excellence before rolling out a bulk print. And I will leave these two attributions on the screen for you to also go and have a little bit more reading to do about the topic. Mine is to say thank you very much for listening to me. Of course, we'll see you next time.